342, Bring Them In. Hymn 642. Seated. Mr. John, Brother John, would you pray for us today?
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here safely tonight, and thank you for bringing us into your fold and bringing us to salvation, reconciling us to yourself and to God the Father. We thank you that we can share in the ministry of the Whatleys down in Peru, and we thank you that they are here tonight to give us an update and so that we can better pray for them in their ministry. And I just ask that you would challenge our hearts tonight as Brother Whatley shares your word, that we would have hearts that would be ready to be challenged to be better messengers of the gospel. And we ask all this in Jesus' name tonight.
You may remain seated as we sing hymn 342, Jesus Saves. Hymn 342.
Jesus saves. That's the message we want to get out all over the world. Well, glad to have you back tonight, and we are privileged to have Tim and Barb with us one last time. It's exciting, but it's sad. Could it actually be 5 more years before we see them in person again? So that's the way it works. They're obeying God's call in their life, so they go with our blessing and with our prayers and our financial support and the assurance that we'll do what we can as a church to be behind them. They're our representatives reaching the lost and building the saints and glorifying God there in Peru. So I mentioned this morning that I asked him in our evening service tonight, in light of our theme for the year, what sort of advice, counsel, teaching would he have for us? And I don't know why I hadn't thought of this earlier, but of all people, our own missionaries ought to have something to say to us. And I'm sure through their experience and training, we'll have something to glean. We'll have a lot of things, I'm sure, to glean tonight from Tim. If we have time, we may take a few questions if you hadn't had a chance to ask any questions. But Brother Tim, time is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Pastor. Yeah, it is hard when a church has shown you as much love and appreciation as you have. It's hard to leave. Can we just stay a little longer? It's been really, really special, and it always is when we come to Parsippany Baptist Church. We always just feel like we're home, like a family. So thank you so much for that, and we do appreciate it. I took some pictures this morning, and on our Kiteni Church WhatsApp group, I posted a few pictures that I took this morning because I want our church people and Pastor Rolando to realize just how great the body of Christ is. They're something. They are part of something much bigger than just little old Kiteni. And so I sent them a few pictures and Pastor Bryden's name and a few things so that they can be praying for us too, because I really believe that the missionary effort is a team effort. It's not just give us your money, we'll go do the work. It's not that. It really isn't. It's you are part of our team, very important part of our team, not just financially, but in prayer and actually taking an interest. And of course, we've had people here from Parsippany down in Peru a few years ago to experience firsthand what God is doing and helped with the building there in Aring at that time. So thank you for being a part of that. And I'm sure our church people in Kiteni are thankful as well. So, all right. So, Jesus' disciple, be one, make one. Yep, good idea. All right, we'll finish in prayer. Right, I know. That is such an important theme, important topic, and it is so broad. How do you shrink it down to a 45-minute thing? It's pretty difficult. And I guess the best that I can say is it is something we need to do. We need to reach people and we need to teach people. So it's not just a matter of getting them saved. Okay, that's over. Now I can move on to somebody else and get them saved. You have to bring up the body of Christ. You have to train them. You have to teach them. You have to grow them. And of course, God's the one who does it, but He uses us. He could have chosen to use a mule, like was it Balaam? He could have chosen to use rocks. Jesus even made reference to that, but He didn't. He chose to use people. So we are instruments in His hands to reach people and to teach people. And how to go about doing it. It just, I've been in discipleship classes and seminars and stuff, and I've actually heard people who are teaching these discipleship seminars. I remember one in Peru where they had a missionary from a different part of the country. I'm not sure who he was with, but he was teaching a discipleship seminar at Calvary Baptist in Cusco, one of our older churches in Cusco. And I remember him saying, and he passed out notes, and he had, okay, here's the 12 steps to making a disciple and all of that. And he said, if you do it this way, I guarantee you'll have disciples. Can we just follow a formula like that? It'll work for some people, but maybe it's not going to work for everybody. You know what I mean? We're dealing with different cultures. Even within Peru, we're dealing with different cultures. So, we have the Cusqueño, the people from Cusco, the Cuscoites, or whatever you call them. We have them. They have their culture. But then when you have the people, the Quechua people, we have Spanish people in Cusco. They have their own culture. They have their own ideas and practices and customs and all of that and ways of thinking. You have the Quechua people in the mountains. They have their customs and ways of thinking and their culture. And then you have Quechua people who have moved to the jungle. They're a little different than the Quechua people that are in the mountains. They think differently. They're much more independent than the people out in the mountains. Then you have tribal people in the jungle, all those tribes that are down there. How can you just apply a formula, 12 steps, and it work for everybody? We haven't seen it work in Peru. We really haven't. What do you do? Well, it just depends. It depends on who we're dealing with, who we're talking to. As far as evangelism, obviously, like I said this morning, the message is always going to be the same. The way we approach it might be different than some people. We live in a day and time where we need to be a little creative without compromising our doctrinal stand, our doctrinal position. We can't compromise who we are, but we might need to be a little creative in how we reach people. I'll just share with you real quickly a method that God used in Peru through us that I don't necessarily recommend. So a few years ago, I was in a pretty serious accident. We had just finished our church anniversary in Aring, and we'd had seminary students who came out to Aring to help with the services and stuff, and so it was 10 o'clock at night after all the anniversary stuff was over and we'd had the big meal and all that, and I'm taking them home to Urubamba, which is about a 17, 18-kilometer drive, late at night. And there was a car who was coming my way. I'm going to Urubamba, he's coming from Urubamba, and he had his bright lights on, and he would not. Peruvians don't turn their brights off. They just don't. You have to flash yours several times before they'll finally give in and turn them down. But this guy didn't. So I slowed way down. I was going pretty slow. And all of a sudden, in front of me, there was this, they have this mode of of moving cargo around. It's called, in Spanish, it's called a triciclo. It's a three-wheeled vehicle, no motor. The back part it looks just like a bicycle, has a seat, pedals, and all that. But the front part has an axle and two wheels and a box to carry cargo. And so the guy in the back, he's steering that box around like this and pedaling, and it's called a triciclo. Well, there was one of those just smack down right. I didn't even have time to hit the brakes. It was right in front of me, and it turned out to be a 16-year-old kid who was very, very drunk. And he was taking his three little sisters and two little neighbor boys for a joyride at 10 o'clock at night on a dark road. And I just didn't see him. And I hit that thing broadside. He was doing donuts in the highway. And I never did see him until I hit him. But I hit him broadside, children just flew out of that thing in different directions. A very scary moment. Nobody was killed. We praise the Lord. There was a little girl who was in the hospital for 7 months as a result of that accident. One little girl wasn't even hurt, but the rest were pretty seriously injured. Well, when that happens, you're in trouble. I had to spend the night in jail. So you're, sorry, ex-con, no. But, I mean, that's the law. Until you know if somebody's going to die or not, you have to stay the night in the police station under lock and key because people flee. People take off and they never see them again. So I was in the police station. The police came. Barb, I ended up having to call Barb. She had to come. We had to get all these little kids into taxis to take them because the medical post there in Urubamba couldn't handle them. We had to evacuate them to Cusco to a larger hospital. Barb had to be put in charge of that because I was arrested until we could figure out what was going to happen. So anyway, and I spent the night there. Policeman would come around and I'd talk to him. But anyway, the next day they did allow me to leave because it looked like there were not going to be any fatalities as a result of that accident. So, but we were in trouble because the guy who's driving the truck is always in trouble. Okay, the pedestrian is never ever at fault. And the 16-year-old kid who was almost killed in the accident, he wasn't at fault, although he was drunk. But it's the driver's fault. It's always going to be the driver's fault. That's just the way the law works in Peru. So I did have to pay some reparations to the families and all of that. But through all of that, around Christmas, we got in contact with the family, with the parents of this kid and these 3 little girls who were in the accident. And so we paid them a visit. And they were alcoholics. She made chicha. Chicha is a corn brew in the mountains that it's awful. I mean, they ferment this stuff until it's bubbling, literally. It's just awful, smells awful. But that's their local brew, and they get very, very drunk off of that. She made it and probably consumed most of what she made most of the time. But anyway, we visited this family. We kind of became friends. I remember we took them a Christmas basket with some groceries in it and stuff just to help the family. Well, it ended up that the boy who was 16 years old, who was peddling the thing, and his oldest sister, they came to church. And eventually they both made decisions for Christ. After that, they were coming to church pretty faithfully for a while, but then all of a sudden the whole family disappeared. We had no idea where they'd gone. Years passed, and I remember on a Sunday morning I was preaching there in the church in Naring, and I look out and I see a new guy come in, and I say, "Oh, welcome to, and could you just stand and give us your name?" And he stood up and he says, "My name is Jorge," which is George. And sat back down. So I welcomed him and, told people, when church is over, walk by and greet Jorge. So after church, he comes walking up to me and he says, "You don't remember who I am, do you?" And I said, "Oh, you're going to have to spark my memory, sorry." And he says, "I'm Jorge. I'm the guy who was pedaling that tricycle 7-8 years ago. And I'm here I have to sign a few papers on our property and all of that, but I came to church because I want you to know that we are now living in Maldonado. I have gotten married. I have a wife. I have a family. I got baptized in the church. My sister's baptized member of the church in Maldonado. I just want you to know that we're following the Lord." So I don't recommend hitting people just so you can witness to them. But God used it. So what's God going to use? I don't think we can limit God and say God has to use this method only. We need to be a little sensitive to what God can do to reach people. And if God can use different methods and different approaches, according to his will. Not all of them are going to be easy, but if he can use different methods to reach people, can't he use different methods to teach people too? And not necessarily, I mean, we need to teach them the truth. That can't change, but how we approach the teaching process could probably vary just a little bit depending on the culture, depending on on who they are, depending on their background. And to be honest with you, I never did train or teach Jorge or Rosemary, his sister. I never. They weren't there long enough, but somebody had. You know, when they moved away, somebody had. They'd done their job, and these two young people who were in the accident were following the Lord and serving in a local church. And that was just a blessing to hear that. So we don't know what God is going to use to reach people. We don't know what he's going to use to teach people. In Kiteni, we, after COVID, so the little guy who brought the little sound system and loaned it to me and asked me to pray from the roof and to do all that, his name was Ramon, about this high. He had been living with his wife for 34 years. They had actually made a profession of faith years before in another church, a different denomination. I believe they really were saved at the time, but then they got caught up in business. No, they never got married, 34 years. They never were baptized. They never followed the Lord in obedience. They left the church because they were too busy with business and all that. And this is all their own admission. So during COVID, we would once a week, we'd kind of sneak out. Sorry, folks. We'd kind of sneak out past the police and the military, and we'd go visit them and have a Bible study in their house. They just lived kitty corner to us. Not like we had to walk all over town to do it, but we'd look up and down, and if there weren't anybody to stop us immediately or in the near vicinity, we'd just go and they'd open the door. They'd see us coming. They'd open the door. We'd walk in. We'd have a Bible study for an hour or two, and then head back home, usually in the evening. So one of the first visits we had with Ramon and Segundina was I got down to the nitty-gritty of the gospel. And they both started crying. And they said, Hermano Timo, we accepted Christ as our Savior 34 years ago. And he told us the church and all that. He says, but we got away from the Lord. And that's how I knew that when this was happening, we needed you to pray for our community, because I knew that you were the real deal, and so I knew that had to happen. And when you said, can we have a Bible study with your family? I said yes, because I knew that it was time to just say, Lord, I'm here to serve you from now on. So we had Bible studies. They did get married. Ramon could read, but he could barely read when all of this was happening during COVID. Now he's the guy who does our Bible reading in the church. We have, Pastor Rolando has organized meetings with the leaders once a week on Tuesday nights. And Ramon is one of the men who's there all the time, being trained and learning more each day. And when we bought the property, the lot that had that 2-story house on it, that used to belong to Ramon. He sold it to us. So I don't know that every time he gets up, but many times when he gets up, he says, I am so thankful that the Lord put in my heart to sell this property to the church so that we can have a church in my house. And he's on the verge of tears when he says this. You know, he's just so thankful for what the Lord has done in Kiteni through this whole time. So we do have a couple of leaders. The other man we have is Uciel. Uciel got saved many years before, and he was in Calvary Baptist Church in Cusco. That's where I first met him when he was a teenager. And he was very involved in the ministry as a young person. He, kind of like Ethan, led the music quite often in Calvary Baptist Church, and I mean, just very active, very personable guy as a teenager. Well, during COVID, when they finally allowed us to start meeting in person up on our rooftop, I looked out one day and there was a guy coming up the stairs, and I thought, surely not. Well, come to find out, it was Uciel, and he had a lady by his side, and he had a little boy in his arms, and so I put two and two together, and I said, okay, Uciel has a family. So after church, went up and talked to him, and he says, Hermano Timo, we have a farm just up the road here, about 15 minutes. Could you come and visit us at some point during the week? I said, sure, we can come visit you. So I went up there, and he just laid his heart out. He got away from the Lord, became a truck driver, ended up meeting a gal in Kiteni, and started living with her and had a little boy. He knew all along he was doing wrong, but God used COVID to help him realize he was in sin and needed to take care of things. So he said, I want you to tell me what I have to do to get my life right with the Lord. So we shared a few things, and one of the first things I said was, you've got a little boy here, you've got a lady you're living with. I think it would be a good idea to get married. She was right there, and she said. So anyway, they did get married, and so he's one of the men who's in the leadership meetings with Pastor Rolando and myself as well, and he does a lot of the song directing, and everything. God has just done a great work in that couple's life. She's our church treasurer. Just so many stories I could tell you. I have never sat down with Uciel or Ramon and said, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, but it's been a process of one-on-one talking about spiritual things. A few weeks ago, Uciel, the second guy I mentioned, he came and he said, Hermano Timo, can we get together one night this week? So I said, yeah, well, how about you come over on Monday night? He said, okay, I'll be here on Monday night. So he came over on Monday night, and he said he had some questions. So he had some questions. I was able to help him with some of those questions he had. And then he said, could we do this every week? This is coming from him. It's not coming from me. It's coming from him. He wants to learn. And so I said, yeah, sure. Once we get back from the States, we'll have to do this once a week. So if you have any questions while we're gone, 4 months worth of questions, write them down, and we'll try to cover those when we get back. So, it hasn't, with the Ciel, it hasn't been a formula. It's kind of, it's just kind of come about in a really, really neat way. And he the other day introduced me to one of his friends on the street, and he says, this is my maestro. Maestro is my teacher. And he doesn't refer to me as his pastor because that's Rolando. I'm his teacher. So a very good relationship there. You need to have some kind of a connection with the people you're trying to teach. And how that goes about, and where you start and all of that. You may start, okay, let's study this program, this theme, this whatever, but maybe they have questions on their hearts that are totally not related to that really need to be answered for them. We found that to be the case in several instances. There was a third man who was coming to these leadership meetings. His name is Emerson. And Emerson he was actually living together, not getting married is the most common thing in Peru. People just live together and don't get married. But once they get saved, we encourage them to get married, get things right with the Lord, become a family with the responsibilities of a husband and all of that. And so anyway, Emerson and Ruth were living together. They had a little boy, and they did make a decision for Christ. And got married. He had already been baptized before. In fact, he went to our Bible school for a year, 2 years, I think. But got away from the Lord. You know, people sometimes do fall by the wayside. And he got away from the Lord, started living with a girl, and had a little boy. Well, they moved to Kiteni for a job, and we visited them and encouraged them to come to church, and they did, and they eventually got married. They moved away a few months ago, so that's why somebody asked, weren't there 3? Yes, there were. But Emerson and Ruth moved back to Lubamba, where she came from, a few months ago. Well, just the last Sunday we were in Kiteni, they showed up in Kiteni again. So they've gotten another job in Kiteni. They're moving back to Kiteni. So pray for Pastor Rolando as he gets Emerson involved in the leadership. He's very good leading music and very, very able person to be a help to Pastor Rolando. So I do know that in the Bible school, Pastor Percy, who is the director of the Bible school, he told us that 2023 was going to be his last year, but we didn't have a director to replace him, so he agreed to stay this year. Now we do have a director to replace him next year, so this is his last year at the Bible school, but he's been there for quite a few years. Anyway, he has started a discipleship program in the Bible school. So every one of our students has discipleship once a week. Some of them, the upperclassmen, actually do discipleship with some of the younger classmen, but the professors, everybody who's involved in the Bible school directly, they do discipleship with one of the students once a week. So Brianna does discipleship with a couple of the girls, actually. Marco, our son-in-law, does discipleship with a couple of the younger students. Pastor Percy and other professors do discipleship with the younger people, because it's not just sitting in the class and learning. They want them to actually get a grasp on what the Christian life is really all about. And I think that's the key. You know, discipleship, as I understand it, is not just reaching people for Christ, but teaching them to live for Christ and to represent Christ with a clear testimony, an exemplary life for Christ. And so they're teaching them not just head knowledge in the classroom, but heart knowledge. Does that make any sense? How do you actually live out your Christian life? And that's what they're doing. So, and that's working. That's really working. They've had some tragedies in the Bible school. You know, Emerson went there for 2 years, fell by the wayside, got caught up in immorality while he was still a student, got kicked out of the Bible school. There've been some tragedies, and so this is an effort to try to help with that situation, so we don't have more tragedies along the wayside. So that's what we're doing. What can you do? What advice do I have for you? Not the former president, but 2 presidents ago of Baptist Missions, Dr. Anderson. Gary Anderson? I don't know if anybody knows Gary Anderson, but he was such a good man of God and president in the Bible and in Baptist Missions. His son, Stephen Anderson, went to Bible college, took a church, was called to a church out in La Junta, Colorado. Anybody know where La Junta, Colorado is? It's out on it's in eastern Colorado, out there where everything is flat and dry, and where they grow a lot of cantaloupe. And they have a lot of antelope too. But anyway, La Junta, Colorado, not an easy town. And the little church in La Junta, Colorado Barb grew up going to camp. She was from Canyon City, and she went to camp in the summertime, and young people from the church in La Junta and other churches in that area would go to camp together. So Barb's known about the La Junta church for many years. Dan Muth, one of our missionaries in Peru for quite a few years, he was from that area. But anyway, Stephen Anderson took the church there in La Junta, Colorado, and started putting some things into practice to reach the community and to teach the community and the believers. And that church just blossomed while he was at the church in La Junta. Little tiny town in eastern Colorado. So, when Patrick Odell was, when he accepted to be the president of Baptist Missions, he contacted Stephen Anderson to come to Baptist Missions and created a whole new office in Baptist Missions. It's called the BMM Church Revitalization Department. And what it is it's an effort of Baptist Missions to serve the local churches here in the States. Churches that are struggling, churches that are trying to reach their community, are not having much success, and how to train the people, how to teach the people. So Stephen Anderson is the head of the Church Revitalization Department of Baptist Missions. And I think it's once a year, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's more than once a year. But I know that the first week of June, they had a revitalization seminar in the offices of Baptist Missions. Pastors came from all over the country, and Stephen Anderson put together some materials and to encourage the local pastors to be able to put into practice some of the things that God used in La Junta, Colorado, and all of that. So it might be a good idea for whenever they have their night. They're going to do this at least once a year. It might be a good idea to send a couple people up to to Cleveland, Ohio, and sit in on these seminars and get some information on that. I would encourage it, because the pastors that were at the seminar at the first week of June, they from what I've been able to read and see, they left very, very encouraged and ready to go to it. So in Peru, we can be in the public schools. And I know that that's a little bit limited here in the States because, you can't even pray in school anymore. So, but there have been some cases where local churches have been able to gain enough trust from the local schools that they've allowed them to have Bible clubs, children's Bible clubs on the school campus. So the church there in South Carolina that I told you about that puts out a hot dog stand. So I don't know if I told everybody, but I know that I told the men yesterday. Puts out a hot dog stand during football season at the local high school and gives out free hot dogs and a drink at the high school football games at the public high school. They actually have an invitation from that high school to have Bible studies with the football team and with the cheerleader squad on campus. I don't know what they had to do to get that kind of permission and that kind of an invitation, but they do. And during the football season, they are on campus reaching young people for Christ, and there have been decisions. And those young people are in the church. We saw them last Sunday. And so God is using that. I said we need to be a little creative. Maybe you can be a little creative yourselves. And maybe what's working in South Carolina may not work here in Parsippany, New Jersey, but seek the Lord, pray for wisdom, and just try something. Handing out bottles of water well, to the people who were parked in the parking lot that had come to the area to look at the fireworks. That's a great idea. And you know, those people will probably not forget that there's a little church there in Parsippany that gave us a free bottle of water. Let's go park at the same parking lot next year for the fireworks. And eventually God may lead them to visit your church. So I think that's a good initiative. That's a great initiative. Maybe there are other things along those lines that could be tried. We've talked with pastors here and churches here in the States who have done, you know, maybe on a holiday weekend or something, they've done car washes in their parking lot. We have a pretty good parking lot out here. And so just free car wash. Put it out there. Okay, so there are gimmicks, but then there are also other methods that I don't consider gimmicks, okay? Because the car washes aren't conditional on, if you visit our church, we'll wash your car for you. There are no conditions. We will give you a free car wash. And just be friendly with the community. Just be nice. You know, just be kind neighbors. And God can use those things to touch the hearts of people who otherwise would be pretty hard to get into. So I've seen churches that have done car washes and stuff, but don't make it conditional. You know, we'll only give you a bottle of water if you come to one service, or we'll only give you the bottle of water if you take this tract and give us your address so we can visit you. Don't make it conditional. Let God do that. You know, just be kind and let God open the hearts of people. That would be my recommendation to you. We've also had occasions when churches have used family fairs. You know, just put a couple of, what do they call those, bouncy things, you know, that float,
Inflatables.
Yeah, inflatables in their parking lot and all of that. And you know, they make maybe some gospel tracts available, but that's not part of the ticket, you know. But God can use those things, you know. And if you're going to have a VBS, try doing something like that a couple of weeks before, and then at the end, invite the kids to VBS. But don't pressure them to come to VBS, because the parents are going to sense that pressure. But let the kids be the ones who say, Mom, can I go to VBS there at the little church where they had the bouncy things, the inflatable things there in the parking lot? And I have talked to pastors who say, we don't emphasize children's ministries, we emphasize families. Okay, that's good. I agree. You need families, not just children. But how do you get to the hearts of the parents? Oftentimes, God uses children to get to the hearts of the parents. And if you can reach the kids, Barb is an example. You know, Barb was the first one who was saved in her family. There were people in the church who would come to her house to pick her and her brothers up to take them to Sunday school. And according to her brothers, there were people in the church who even thumped them on the head when they misbehaved in church. But they remembered that. And so eventually God led Barb received Christ as Savior, and eventually her mom and her brothers got saved. God reached into the family through the kids. God can do that. So this is my opinion. Okay, I can't go to the Bible, but it does say, doesn't it? Let the little children come unto me. Maybe if we bring the children to Christ, maybe God can use the children to bring mom and dad to Christ. God can. I've talked to pastors who are totally against that, and I that's fine. I respect that, but we've seen it work, and we've seen it work in Peru. We do have children's clubs. We do have activities, So those are just some recommendations that I would share with you at this time. I don't know if are there any questions? When are you leaving? When are you getting out of here? Anybody have any questions? It doesn't necessarily have to be about what we talked tonight, but it could be. Or maybe just something that I rushed over or skipped altogether this morning or yesterday. Any questions? Yes, Pastor.
If we can pray Marco a visa and get him to faith, who would take his place at the Bible college?
So we do now have a director for the Bible school. The school year in Peru is March through December. So the school year starts in March. Okay, it's because it's different seasons. So summer is, late December, January, February. School starts up in March. So we have a director who will take over the directorship of the Bible school in March. But he is already at the Bible school now as the director of studies, something that we did not have before. And he's able to teach some classes and do all that. So we're praying that he will be able to step in. If Marco has to leave this year, somebody's going to have to step in and take his place for the rest of this year. There are, we do have capable people. We need to let God be the one who touches their heart to be able to do what Marco is doing. It's going to take more than one, to be honest with you. Marco has a very heavy load. He's studying at Faith Baptist Bible College online. Last I knew, he was teaching Last I knew, he was teaching six courses at the Bible school. He has a pretty heavy load. And plus he does the discipleship, plus he's the treasurer of the Bible school. I mean, he has a pretty heavy load. It's going to take more than one person to cover all of that, I believe. So, for the immediate future, there is somebody who could step in and at least cover part of that. We're going to need more people for next year. So that is a matter of prayer. If you want to add that to this morning's prayer list, please do that. Pray about a visa for Marco now that he brought it up. Brianna's a U.S. citizen. Marco is Peruvian. But being a U.S. citizen does not guarantee that the spouse is going to have a visa. Okay, it doesn't work that way. So Marco is applying for a visa. Brianna, he does speak English. He would qualify in that sense. All of his classes through Faith are in English. There's no problem there. The problem is Brianna has never made enough money to be his sponsor. She has $700 support at this point. The government just kind of smiles at that and says, "Oh, that's nice," but it doesn't fulfill their needs. So pray about that visa. There is a family in Iowa now that has offered to be his joint sponsor. And so there's some details that need to be worked out about that, but we have some hopes that he could possibly be back in the States. They have been accepted by the U.S. Embassy to go to the next step. That doesn't mean they're going to come to the States. It means the next step in the process. And eventually, if the steps keep going and they're able to move on, then eventually they will have an interview at the U.S. Embassy in Lima, and then the final decision will be based on how that interview goes. But there are certain things that need to happen, requirements by the U.S. government that need to happen and be in place before they will be able to get that interview. So pray that this process can keep moving. It's kind of slow. It's not at all fast. They need a lot of patience. Their prayer is that they'd be able to get up here to start school in the fall. If that happened, it would actually be almost a miracle because the time constraints it's just such a short time. But that's okay. They are willing to wait until next semester, if that's what the Lord allows. I mean, they might have to get to faith in the middle of the year. I don't know. God knows all that. But pray that they would have the patience and that God would show the way and work all those details out. So, all right. Any other prayer requests? Any other questions? I started to say any other preguntas. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So besides your work in Kiteni, are you involved at all in the Bible Institute, the college?
Thank you. I am now in two ways. So because I had to leave the altitude with my migraines and all of that, I had to stop teaching at the Bible school for several years. 8 years I didn't teach. I'd taught every year until then. But I did teach a class earlier this year in March. I had a module, a 3-week module, and I went for 3 weeks with no migraines. That's of the Lord. And then the day after the module was over, I had a migraine. So it's just, it's of the Lord when that happens. And so I have started teaching. It's the only class I'm teaching this year. I'm willing to teach another class or two next year if the Lord allows that. So that's one way I'm involved in the Bible school again. But since late 2022, I have been on the board of the Bible school. So I'm in all the board meetings. I'm in all of the decision-making process of the Bible school. The board meetings are held by Zoom, so I don't have to go up to the altitude for all these meetings. I just click and I'm on. Zoom's a great thing to be able to avoid a lot of mileage. So I am on the board of the Bible school at this time, so I'm pretty familiar with how the process is going and what needs to continue happening and all of that. So those are the two ways I'm involved directly with the Bible school at this time. Mm-hmm. All right. Is that it?
I'm always curious, missionaries who are out of the States for so many years and they come back and you're visiting all these churches. And I picked up on this from Rachel's parents. What are the things that you observe in churches that discourage you? What are some things you've observed that encourage you? We're in the midst of it, and sometimes an outsider coming in sees things that we don't see, both negative and positive. So.
Okay. Things that are very discouraging. One would be indifference. Churches that are willing to give their money but are really not interested beyond that. Take our money, do your job, but just kind of keep us out of it. I mean, that's what we sense in some, not all churches, and I have to say not many churches. Most churches are, to one degree or another, interested in what God is doing in Peru, but that can be very discouraging when a church supports you, but when you show up to give a report, they really don't want to hear it. The pastor doesn't really want to hear it. A lot of it depends on the pastor. So I will say Parsippany Baptist Church is doing it right. And thank you, Pastor Bryden, for that. Because, a church is a reflection of their pastor. It really is. And this church is just, I don't know that I've ever been discouraged when I've come here. I think probably not. I do remember many times when I've been encouraged by you folks. Just the kindnesses and the, we really do feel like we're part of a family here. And then meeting new people who are so kind and everything with us. That's an encouragement. So indifference can be a discouragement at times, and we do see that sometimes. I fear that it might get worse as time goes on because, more and more we're seeing that. I really feel for the young couples who are raising support right now because those are the churches they're raising support from, and I think that would be very discouraging for them. But they're millennials, so maybe they handle it differently than I do. So that could be one thing. Barb, help me.
Churches that go to one extreme or the other extreme? tattooed and electric guitars on this
Yeah.
platform, whereas before it was like this service.
It's, so what Barb is saying is another thing that can be discouraging is when churches go to one extreme or the other. Okay, so you have churches, you come back to the States and you contact your churches, and all of a sudden a church that a few years ago you felt quite comfortable in, now they're saying, you can't use anything but the King James Bible. And what do you use in Spanish, by the way? Is it a translation like the King James is, or is it one of those new translations? And I mean, they talk like this. And so they've gone to one extreme, and we've lost support over that subject, even just in the last year. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is you come back to a church that just 5 years ago you were quite comfortable in, and you don't recognize anything. Because, as Barb said, the youth pastor has shorts and a tank top and an electric guitar and tattoos all over and big loudspeakers, and you sit in the church and you go deaf because of how loud the music is, and it's very disconcerting. It's confusing to us. What happened in 5 years? It's just, what is this? And so we've actually declined support from some of those churches. So those two things can be very discouraged. The extremes. It's good to see a constant on a furlough. So those can be some things. Maybe Barb can think of something else. Yeah, and I've got to be careful here. Okay, I'll try to be careful. Tiptoe. We have had, if you've been to Peru and you've seen what God is doing, you know that we really are pretty busy. We really don't have a lot of time. And it takes 8 hours to get from Kiteni to Urubamba. If I'm going to go teach a class, it's going to take me 8 hours. And then 8 hours back for the weekend to be in the church. And then 8 hours back on Sunday evening to get back to back to Urubamba to teach a class. Yeah, there's just a lot of that. It takes me 2.5 hours to get to some of the churches out in the villages. So there's a lot of travel time involved. But then, I need to put a lot of time into preparation. I need to put a lot of time into studying. I need to put a lot of time into visiting the new people and teaching them and encouraging them. And just, we really are quite busy. So it can be a little bit difficult when a church that we were just at a year ago sends us, a 10-page what do they call them? Questionnaire. A 10-page questionnaire. And you remember you answered some of those questions a year ago. I'm sorry, folks. I'm just going to be honest. I kind of don't like the questionnaires. If it's a one-page questionnaire, okay, that's fine. And if it's the usual questions, but when was the last time that you sat down with somebody and actually made an effort to lead them to the Lord? Well, the last time was 5 minutes ago, probably. I mean, it's an everyday thing, Please give details. So you have these questions about all this stuff. Please give details. And I know that's really off the wall, but that can sometimes be a little discouraging because we have to take time to answer all of that. And you have to think through, I'm not going to sit down and fill that out in 5 minutes. I really need to pray about it because I want to be honest. I don't want to give a false impression about what we're doing in Peru. Do you have a personal time in prayer? Yeah, well, I can answer that, yes. How often? Oh, okay, well, that may vary from day to day. So those kinds of things they can be a little bit discouraging because I've got to visit this family in 10 minutes, or I've got to start on a trip in half an hour. Or I really need to prepare a message for this Sunday and stuff like that. So, Barb.
And those questionnaires are often done by a pastor who's assumed the pastorate of a supporting church. And it's an effort to get to know the missionaries. And so sometimes you really do want to get to know the pastor, but it's just so laborious. And then that's kind of the flip side of churches that get a new pastor and they don't even tell you, and you have no way to reach that pastor.
Right.
You don't even know his name.
And that can be another very discouraging thing, is when it's time to start scheduling meetings for furlough and you don't have contact information. So you go to the church webpage, you cannot find a phone number on the webpage because a lot of times it's just a church phone and they have no secretary. So you call and you call and you call and you leave a message, and then 2 weeks go by and apparently they haven't heard the message. You don't have an email. You don't have a phone number to call. You don't have any way to really contact the pastors. And you're getting a little desperate because you need to get this thing organized so you can get to the States and things flow smoothly. That's one. About the questionnaires, we had a church just 4 years ago probably that sent us it had to be longer than that. No, it was about 4 years ago. They sent us a big questionnaire, and it was a long one. It was one of those that was very, very we want to get to know our missionary. And so, I filled it out, and I sent it in, and I had to scan it and send it by email, which is a piece of cake. I can do that. But when I tried to get a hold of them to schedule a meeting, I never was able to contact the pastor. Finally, somebody else in the church wrote back and said, yes, sure, that date is great. Come on in. We'll have you speak to the church at that point. So we went. This was in Colorado. And we pulled up into the church parking lot. The pastor was out. I mentioned this to somebody yesterday, and maybe it was all the men, I don't know. But pulled up into the parking lot. The pastor was out in the parking lot. And, he sees us walking up toward the entrance to the church, and he sticks out his hand and says, nice to meet you. I am Pastor such and such. What's your name? Well, I'm Tim. We're Tim and Barbara Whatley. We're the missionaries to Peru. And we've got our display in our hands and all of this because it's been scheduled, right? He says, oh, yeah. So you're the Whatleys, huh? You're the Whatleys. Well, that's really nice. Good to meet you. Come on in, set up your table. We'll give you a table to set up. And then during announcements, we'll give you a welcome, and you can stand up and wave at the people so they can know who you are. And then after church, those who want to approach and take a prayer card and greet you or ask some questions can do that. So we set up our display. We sat down in the pews, and the pastor said, okay, we do have a visiting missionary here. Where are you? Can you remind us what your name is? Okay, well, we're glad you're here. Folks, this is Tim and Barbara Whatley, missionaries in Peru. Please, they have a display in the back. Please walk by and greet them, take a prayer card, and if you have any questions, they'd be happy to answer. And that was the church that had just sent a long, whatever you call those things, a questionnaire, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years before that. So that's just one case. All right, so I think time is up. I'm looking back at the clock, and I'm expecting somebody to give me the eye in any minute. So I'm done. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you want to know more, come to Peru. That's the best answer I can give you. Thank you, Pastor.
We don't really have favorite missionaries around here. That wouldn't be appropriate. But over the years, I've noticed we do have a more special, seems like, connection with the Whatleys through the years. And I think that's because we had a group there. So many of our folks had been there. And it's just something about when you are there, you understand. So Thank you for sharing that. I'll pray. Anything else I need to remind you of? On your way out, if you're going to be at the brunch on Saturday, please sign up so we have a good idea of who's going to be there. You don't have to bring anything for the brunch on Saturday. We'll have the Swedbergs. And then on Sunday, remember, it's a fellowship meal Sunday, so bring the usual for that. So we'll do missions again next weekend, and we'll see if I keep saying Whatley instead of Swedberg. So, Bruce, could I have you close our time in prayer? Let's stand together. Bruce, close us in prayer, and thank the Lord for a great day we had today.
Father, we thank you for including us in your eternal plan. Thank you for sending your Son to make this all possible.
Yes. Oh, Tim and Barb, we want to get your picture. So if you, up here, Ralph, you're going to take it? On the platform? Okay. On top of the,
I'm going to grab this water right now.